Hello, welcome to Lecture 10, Part 1 for Life in the Universe. In this lecture, we will continue with Unit C. In fact, this lecture completes Unit C. We'll do this lecture in 3 videos because we've got 3 overall properties of life that I want us to look at in a little bit more detail. Metabolism, reproduction, and evolution. And this first video in this lecture we will do with metabolism. But we have a first video of the lecture. So that means we've got an alien to think about for fun. And so here we have one from a famous episode of The Twilight Zone, where these, as you can see, tall aliens with big heads called Canamots arrive on Earth. And they say they're here to help. In fact, their culture is guided by a book called To Serve Man. And everything seems to be checking out. The end of the episode, a few people are getting on their ship to go back to their planet with them. And then the human being restrained by the alien here is yelling at one of the human characters about to get on the ship, saying, "We finished translating to the book To Serve Man. It's a cookbook." So you know how that goes. Anyway, in the description, I will have a link to Twilight Zone soundtrack if you want to go listen to some music to go with it. All right, so in this video, we're going to take a look at metabolism in some very broad views. So metabolism refers to basically all the chemical reactions needed to sustain an organism. So this is what's going on to provide raw energy for it, converting raw materials into building blocks for other needed molecules, and eliminating of waste. Now, there are a lot of different ways we can classify by metabolism. And here's one way to do it, in which case we can build up some really long words in the process. Kind of 3 categories here with a couple of different options. So part of it is by the organism's energy source. Does it get it from light, or does it get it from molecules? So we start with photo if it's light, chemo if molecules, okay? Details we don't need to worry about, but a lot of chemical reactions involve donation of an electron from one molecule to another. And so is the electron donor coming from organic compounds, things containing carbon, or is it coming from inorganic compounds? Organo for the first, litho for the second. And then the final dimension we'll look at here is where does the organism get its carbon? Organic compounds basically means getting it from pre-existing organic molecules, usually by consuming either other organisms or some product of other organisms. And so that gets a hetero in this long thing. I'll show you what these words look like when we put them together. And if it gets this carbon from inorganic compounds, in other words, CO2 directly, which is technically not considered an organic molecule, then it gets an auto. Okay, and then we end all of this with troph. And like I said, we'll see in the next slide how these words build up. And if you wanted to leave part of it out, then say if you want to do a light energy source, inorganic compound carbon source, not worry about the electron gunner, you can just call it a photoautotroph, but I'll show you the whole long words. Also, I'll just mention this in one word. You can also classify metabolism based on whether or not oxygen or some other molecule is used as a silent electron acceptor in respiration. It's either aerobic or anaerobic. Okay, so here are these metabolic classifications. When you throw them together, they use really long, hard to pronounce words. What organisms we know of might fall into these groups. So in the photoorganoheterotroph group, there are some bacteria that do that. It's not clear that there are any photoorganoautotrophs among terrestrial life. There are also some bacteria, however, that are classified as photolithoheterotrophs. And in photolithoautotrophs, we have cyanobacteria, plants, and algae all fall into this group. A large group are chemoorganoheterotrophs, which are animals, including, of course, us, fungi, and then protists refer to single-celled eukaryotes. So some of those, like an amoeba, would fall in that group. Not clear if Earth has any chemoorganoautotrophs. Some bacteria fall into chemolithoheterotrophs, and some bacteria, along with archaea, the other big domain in besides bacteria and eukaryotes, are chemolithoautotrophs. So the point is really that there's a wide variety in how you can do your metabolism with lots of different aspects of it. However, got one more thing before we get to that next one. I forgot about this slide. This is a cool slide. Okay, so there are organisms which can do more than one of the options along there. And then, so the term mixotroph can be used for them. And it's mostly aquatic protists, single-celled aquatic eukaryotes that do this. It's kind of hard to decide. So they can maybe sometimes photosynthesize, but also eat other things, example. But there are examples among plants and animals, and here are some of that. The pretty green thing on the left is a swimming sea slug. And the reason it's green is because of chlorophyll, which you probably know is the photosynthetic pigment used by plants and algae and also cyanobacteria. So the sea slug feeds on algae. And when it eats the algae, instead of digesting the chloroplast immediately, the chloroplast and the algae it eats are transferred to its own cells, and they continue to photosynthesize for a month or two, and then they need to be replaced. They don't survive very well, the sea slug cells. But this gives basically the sea slug an additional source of energy besides what it eats. It can actually photosynthesize. And then on the right is a Venus flytrap, which you probably know is a form of carnivorous plant. Insect lands in the leaves, which then will close on it. And then the plant will then digest and get nutrients from that insect. But as you can tell from the green color, it's got chlorophyll, so it also photosynthesizes. Now, obviously, there are a lot of variations in the details of metabolism. But it turns out that there are still a lot of similarities in metabolic pathways and in specific molecules that are used. I'm just going to give you one example of it, and there's more, but this is one I'll give you. And if you ever took biology in high school, you probably learned about this molecule, something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate for short. And so basically what the molecule is that this part right here on the left is the, or maybe this part, this part right here, the far left, that is the A base that's used in RNA and DNA. This thing right here is the ribose sugar, and that would be part of the DNA backbone. That's a phosphate group. And so from this phosphate group over is basically the A nucleotide for DNA and or for RNA rather. But instead of one phosphate group, the triphosphate, it's got 3 phosphate groups attached. And it turns out that by, if you do a chemical reaction and remove the 3rd phosphate group, convert it to adenosine diphosphate or ADP, that's a reaction that releases energy. If you put a phosphate group back on to convert the ADP to ATP, that absorbs energy. So all known terrestrial organisms actually use this molecule or these 2 molecules, I guess would be a way to think about it, add a phosphate group to ADP to store energy, store the energy in the ATP till you need it, take the phosphate group off, turn it back to ADP and release the energy. All known terrestrial organisms use this molecule for this purpose. All right, so you want to know more about metabolism, go take a biology course, but our attendance secret code is probably the most famous character played by the actor playing the alien at the beginning of this lecture. His name was Richard Keel, and he played the character Jaws, not the shark, but the James Bond villain in a couple of the James Bond movies. He had steel sharp teeth. Really, I think the dumbest idea they ever came up with for a James Bond villain, but I guess amusing in its own right. All right, so that's what I want to tell you about metabolism. So in the next video, we'll look at some general parts about how terrestrial organisms reproduce. See you there.